Devil Worship in France. A record of things seen and heard in the secret societies, according to the evidence of initiates. Chapter 7. The Devil and the Doctor. Le Diable, au, I don't know how to say 19, Cecil. Although the new and reformed Palladium is said to have been founded so far back as 1870, it will be seen that the close of the year 1891 had become public concerning it at the close of the year 1891. It is difficult to conceive that an institution diffused so widely should have remained so profound a secret when the many enemies of the fraternity who in their way are sleepless would have seized eagerly upon the slightest hint of a directing center of Masonry. Moreover, the association which initiates ladies, which initiates ladies is perhaps the last which would expect to be unknown. For the while the essential matter of a secret is undeniably safe, with women it is on condition they are known to possess it. Now, they're just presuming, it initiates women. It has a secret center. It must be evil. Plenty of groups with centers. Oh, but the Catholics. Oh, the Catholics, their higher ranks don't include women. But they do have women's orders. But only the Catholic Church can sanction there being women's orders, Only they can have a center location. I guess that's the idea in some people's heads. When the first hint was provided in 1891, Leo Taxil certainly lost no time, and Magistrate Buren must have written his large treatise almost at fervor speed. On the 20th of November in the same year, another witness came forward in the person of Dr. Bataille, who speedily made it apparent that he was in a position to reveal everything about universal Masonry and Diabolism in connection therewith, because unlike those who had preceded him, he possessed first-hand knowledge. If he had not himself beheld Lucifer in all his lurid glory, he had at least seen his messengers. He was an initiate of most secret societies, which remotely or approximately are supposed to connect with Masonry. He had visited Charleston, where he had examined the genuine Baphomet and the skull of Jacques de Molay, and was personally acquainted with Albert Pike, Phileas Walder, Gallatin Mackay. He was moreover an initiate of the Palladium. He was evidently the missing witness who could unveil the whole mystery, and it would be difficult to escape from his conclusions. Finally, he was not a person who had come out of Masonry by a suspicious and sudden conversion, believing it to be evil. He had entered with the intention of exposing it, and had spent 10 years in his researches, and now stepped forward with his results. The office of a spy is not usually clean or wholesome, but occasionally such services are valuable, and in some cases there may be certain ends which justify the use of means which would in other cases be questionable. So until we can prove the contrary, it will be reasonable to accept the solemn declaration of this witness that he acted with a good intention, and that what he did was in the interest of the church and the world. Now, there are still church services that call Jesus Lucifer, and still Bibles that kind of have that. But the thing is that in the Christian mind, the idea of another hero, another light bringer, must be super evil. So whether a spirit of Venus or something else was just completely demonized, and that was where a lot of things came from. But a lot of these organizations are about becoming a Lucifer, about being in touch with the the dualistic nature of whatever, and Baphomet being a personification of that, and actually, by experience, I would say a species. But when you do an insight roll, you don't have to lie. You don't have to be dishonest. You do what you do, and people presume things, and fine, maybe you let them presume things, but you don't have to do things that are wrong according to your belief. In a lot of instances, you don't have to say the words of disbelief even. People just assume, you never worship the guru, and they assume you worship the guru. Never said anything of the sort, but hanging out with them, you must worship the guru, right? But unfortunately, Dr. Patel has seen fit to publish his testimony precisely in that form, which is most calculated to challenge the motive. It is a perfited narrative, issued in penny numbers, with absurd illustrations of a highly sensational type. In a word, Le Diable au, 19 siècle, which is the title given to his memoirs by the present witness, connects in a manner and appearance that class of literature which is known as the penny dreadful. Some years ago, the slums of London and Paris were inundated with romances published in this fashion, and continued so long as they maintained a remunerative circulation. In many cases, they ended abruptly. In others, they extended, like Le Diable au 19 siècle, to hundreds of issues. They possess special characteristics which are known to experts in the byways of periodic literature, and all these are to be found in the narrative of Dr. Bataille. It's the equivalent of the dime store novel and the supermarket's, book. No one in England would dream of publishing in this form a work which was to be taken seriously, nor am I acquainted with any precedent for it abroad. It is therefore a discreditable and unfortunate choice, but seeing that a section of the clerical press in France has agreed to pass over this point, and to accept Dr. Bataille as a credible witness, and seeing also that he's been followed by other writers who must be taken into account and stand or fall with him, we must not regard his method as an excuse for refusing to hear him. Apart from him and his adherents, there is indeed no first-hand evidence for Palladian masonry. The present chapter will, therefore, contain a summary of what was seen and heard by Dr. Bataille in the course of his researches. Why Signor Carbuccia was damned. In the year 1880, Dr. Hacks, who makes, I believe, no attempt to conceal himself under the vesture of Dr. Bataille, was a ship's surgeon on board the steamboat Anadire, belonging to the Compagnie de Messageries Maritimes, or Compagnie des Messageries Maritimes. I'm not sure which language this is supposed to be read as, but and then returning from China with passengers and merchandise on a certain day in June of the year mentioned, he was to the fore at his post of duty. That is to say, he was extended idly over the extreme length of a comfortable deck chair, and the Hotel Flottant was anchored at the Point de Galet, a port in the southern extremity of Ceylon, and one of the reputed regions of the terrestrial paradise, while the doctor, like a good Catholic, put a polish on the tropical monument by a little gloss, a speculation over the mystery of Eden. Some passengers presently came on board for the homeward voyage, and among them was Gaetano Carbuccia, an Italian who was originally a silk merchant, but owing to Japanese competition had been forced to change his métier, and was now a dealer in curiosities. Métier? His numerous commercial voyages had made them well acquainted with each other. But on the present occasion, Carbuccia presented an appearance which alarmed his friend. A Gaillard grand et solide had been metamorphosed suddenly into an emaciated and feeble old man. There was a mystery somewhere, and the ship's doctor was destined to diagnose its character. After wearing, for a certain period, the aspect of a man who has something to tell, and cannot summon courage to tell it, a position which is common in novels, the Italian at length unbosomed himself, beginning dramatically enough by a burst of tears, and the terrific information that he was damned. But the Carbuccia of old was a riotous, joyful, foul-tongued, pleasure-loving atheist. A typical commercial traveler with a strain of Alsatia and the mountain brigand. Now, why can't a theist be just as pleasure-loving and joyful? And why can't a theist have something to riot against, right? How come this red-tide scoffer so far on the road of religion is to be damned? Some foolish fancy had made the ribald Gaetano turn a mason. When one of his boon companions had suggested the evil course, he had refused blankly, apparently because he was axed, rather than because it was evil. But he had scarcely regained his home in the Pauls. Naples? Then he became irreparably initiated. The ceremony was accomplished in a street of that city by a certain Giambattista Pessina, who was a most illustrious sovereign grand commander, past grand master, and grand hierophant. Of the antique and oriental rite of Memphis and Misraim, who, for some reason which escapes analysis, recognized Carbuccia as a person who deserved to be acquainted with the whole physiology and anatomy of masonry. It would cost 200 francs to enter the 33rd grade of the sublime mystery. Carbuccia closed with this offer, and was initiated there and then across the table, becoming a grand commander of the temple, and was affiliated for a further subscription of 15 francs annually to the A.E.Waite of Naples, receiving the passwords regularly. Now, you do have to, in pretty much every order, you got to make your way up the ranks one by one. But even when you're picked out of the blue, whether it's a low initiate or whatever, it's like, this is the guy that's going to lead us. He's got to be like, you know, Eckankar is an example, uh, where it is, historically known that the second historical leader of them, the second known in his lifetime as a living Eckmaster, he was somebody who, you know, he was someone who, you know, they gave him one initiation after another, but I mean, there was a little space in between. I think it took months, like a month apart or something. He received the rest of the initiations up to the ninth, so they could consider him a leader. But it wasn't that, and it certainly wasn't he paid extra. No, this is not what's going on. Um, Impelled by an enthusiasm for which he himself was unable to account, he now lent a ready ear to all dispensers of degrees, Memphis initiates of Manchester, or lured him into Kabbalistic rites. He fell among occult masons. Like the Samaritan among thieves, he became a sublime, hermetic philosopher. Overwhelmed with solicitations, he fraternized with the brethren of the new reformed Palladium, and optimated with the Society of Rethurgists, the Society of Rethurgists, from whom he ultimately received the veritable initiation of the Magi. Everywhere lodges opened to him, everywhere mysteries unveiled, everywhere in the higher grades he found spiritism, magic, evocation. His atheism became impossible, and his conscience troubled. Now, particularly when you look at the Bible, you're going to run into a particular issue. And that particular issue, what do you think that particular issue is? That particular issue is that there are different levels of meanings and different interpretations than you may be used to, or the public may be used to. And it doesn't mean that it's evil that, they're looking at the number values and looking how words compare to each other, and symbolism that maybe leads you to something that's doesn't have anything to do with the literal meaning of the passage, maybe even conflicts, which is a problem in most faiths, but in biblical interpretation, it isn't necessarily considered as such. But anyways, just pick up the Talmud, flip pages, and you end up breaking commandments because you're following Talmud instead of. I mean, that's not usually the case, but there's certainly many instances. The fact that I could visit a Jewish center for for not too long, and flip through some books and find a couple. There's got to be many in that wall of books. Ultimately, his business led him to revisit Calcutta, where his last unheard of experience had overwhelmed his whole being. Just 8 days previously, to his encounter with Dr. Batella, he had found the Palladist of that city in a flutter of feverish excitement because they had succeeded in obtaining from China the skulls of 3 martyred missionaries. These treasures were indispensable to the successful operation of a new magical rite composed by the Supreme Pontiff of Universal Masonry and Vicegerent of Lucifer, General Albert Pike. A séance was about to be held. Brother George Shackleton of immortal memory, the hero who had obtained the skulls, was present with those trophies, and the petrified quondam atheist took part, not because he wished to remain, but because he did not dare to go. The proceedings began, and the skulls were placed on the tables. Adonai and his Christ were cursed impressively. Lucifer, as solemn and blessed, invoked at the altar of Baphomet. Nothing could be possibly more successful. Result: shocks of earthquake threatened immediate demolition of the whole place. Confident expectation of being entombed alive, terrific burst of thunder, a brilliant light, an impressive silence of some seconds, and the sudden manifestation of a being in human form seated in the chair of the Grand Master. It's obvious that this stuff going on is psychic rather than physical, because the outside people had no indication of earthquakes and lightning and all that. It was an instantaneous apparition of an absolute bodily substance, which carried its own warrant of complete bona fides. Everyone fell on their knees. Everyone was invited to rise. Everyone rose accordingly. And Carbuccia found that he had to do with a male personage not exceeding 38 years, naked as a drawn sword, with a faint flush of infernus suffusing his skin, a species of light inherent which illuminated the darkness of the salon. In a word, a beardless Apollo, tall, distinguished, infinitely melancholy, and yet with a nervous smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The apparition of Aut Diabolos, Aut Nihil, divested of evening dress, the unashamed nakedness, who was accepted as the manifestation of Lucifer, discoursed pleasantly to his children, electing to use the excellent English, and foretold his ultimate victory over his eternal enemy. He assured them of continued protection, alluded in passing to the innumerable hosts which surrounded him in his eternal dominion, and incited his hearers to work without ceasing for the emancipation of humanity from superstition. The discourse ended. He quitted the dais, approached the Grand Master, and eye to eye fixed him in deep silence. After a pause, he passed on, without committing himself to any definite observation. Yet there seems to have been a meaning in the ceremony, for he successfully repeated it in the case of every dignitary congregated at the eastern side, and finally at the ordinary members. When it came to the turn of Carbuccia, he would have given 10 years of his life to have been at the galleys rather than Calcutta, but he contrived to pull through without, however, creating a favorable impression, for Adversarius Noster Diabolus passed on with a contracted brow, and when the disconcerting iniquity was over, returned to the center of the circle, and gave a final glance around, approached Shackleton, and civilly requested him to shake hands. The importer of missionary skulls compiled with a horrible yell, and there was an electric shock, sudden darkness, and a general coup de théâtre. When the torches were rekindled, the apparition had vanished. Shackleton was discovered to be dead, and the initiates crowding round him, saying, "Glory immortal to Shackleton. He has been chosen by our omnipotent God." It was too much for the galliard merchant, and he swooned. Yeah, it sounds like a bunch of projections about what secret societies are up to, right? Now, this is why Signor Carbuccia concluded that he was damned, which appears to have been precipitate. He has contrived, by the good offices of his lay confessor, to square matters with the hierarchy of Adonai, who belongs to the Latin persuasion. He has changed his name, adopted a third profession, and is so safe in retreat that his friends are as unlikely to find him as are the enemies who thirst for his blood. Dr. Bataille, faithful to his role of good Catholic, perceived at once that the merchant's story of these new Arabian Nights was characterized by an extreme frankness, was devoid of a sinister motive, and was not the narrative of a maniac. A physician, he adds sententiously, is not to be deceived. He determined thereupon that he himself would descend into the abyss, taking with him a mental reservation in all he said and did, as a kind of discharge in full. The Church and humanity required it. Behold him, then presently, at the pulse, making acquaintance with Signor Passina, and outdoing Carbuccia by expending 500 francs in the purchase of the 90th Misraim grade, thus becoming a sovereign Grand Master for life. I will be the exploiter, and not the accomplice of modern Satanism, said the pious Dr. Bataille. Well, if things are open theologically, mystically, and you intend to be a Satanist, of course you're going to be a Satanist. But that doesn't mean that everybody else in the organization, they didn't tell me they're Satanists, but I'm presuming it's Satanism. I'm practicing it as if it's Satanism. It's like, okay, different. The one-upmanship is like, I spent more. I went further in the organization. Yeah. A priestess of Lucifer, fortified with the purchase of his Memphis sovereignty and the possession of various signs and passwords communicated by Carbuccia, which, by some interposition of Providence, must be assumed to have remained unchanged in the intervening period, Dr. Bataille entered on his adventurous mission, bedewed with many tears, and sanctified by many blessings of an old spiritual adviser, who, needless to say, was at first hostile to the enterprise, and was afterwards as inevitably disarmed by the eloquence and enthusiasm of his disciple. Having regard to the fact that Masonry and Diabolism abound everywhere, according to the hypothesis, it obviously mattered little at what point he began the prosecution of his design. All roads lead to Rome, and the statement is equally true of the Rome of Masonry and the Vatican of Lucifer. As a fact, he started where Carbuccia may have been said to left off, namely at Point de Galle in southern Ceylon, and there determined to acquaint himself with Senegalese Kabbalism, a department of transcendental philosophy about as likely to be met with in that reputed region of the terrestrial paradise as occultists from the great South Sea and the back parts of Notting Hill. Signor Passina, however, had provided him with the address of a society which operated something that the doctor agrees to term Kabbalah, after the same manner that he misnames most subjects, but he was not destined to Kabbalize. Repairing to the principal hotel, he there witnessed, through one of the fortuitous occurrences which are sometimes the mask of fate, a sufficiently indifferent performance by native jugglers, the chief of whom was exceedingly lean and so dirty as to suggest he was remote from godliness. During the course of the conjuring of this personage, held the doctor by a certain meaning glance of his glittering eye, and when all was over, the latter had a private information that Setta desired to speak with him. The naive mind of the doctor regarded the name as significant in view of his mission. Setta was assuredly a Satanist. He consented incontinently and was greeted by the juggler with certain mysterious signs which showed that he was a Luciferian of the sect of Carbuccia. Luciferian means something different than Satanist, although they can coincide. Though by what device of the devil he divined the doctor's adeptship, the devil and not the doctor could alone explain at the moment. A miscellaneous language is apparently spoken by the Cingalese jugglers, Tamil, including a little bad French, not less convenient than needful in the present case. It was made clear by some brief explanations that the medical services of Dr. Batil were solicited at the deathbed of a personage named Mahma, for which purpose the two entered a hired conveyance, while the rank and file of the jugglers followed at brisk trot. In this matter, they traversed a frightful desert, plunged into a forest of brushwood, finally forded a stream, and after 2 hours arrived at an open clearing, in the center of which was a hut. An ape occupied the threshold. A vampire bat hung from a convenient beam. A cobra was curled underneath, and a black cat welcomed them with arched back. The ape spoke Tamil freely, and then marched off. Reflected upon which circumstance, the doctor thought that it was quite the strangest thing in the world. The hut was the covering of a species, well down, with some quakings for safety of limbs and body. Our adventurer was proceeded to follow his guides, and they reached at the end of a long flight of steps an immense mortuary chamber. And I'm going to stop there. And remember, there are real satanic conspiracies. Just because people make up some, there are real satanic goings on.